My brothers, my sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today we speak not just of Burkina Faso, but of Africa's awakening. If you believe in freedom, unity, and the power of our people, then make sure you subscribe. Share this story, and let the world hear Africa's voice. Because what you are about to witness is not just history, that is destiny. Under the sleepless skies of Ouagadougou, a storm brews without rain. The palace lights flicker, not from weather, but from the tension that hums through every wire, every hallway, every breath. Tonight should have been a celebration, a leader's wedding, a union of love, loyalty, and peace. Instead, it feels like the prelude to betrayal. Inside the marble corridors of the presidential wing, footsteps echo, measured and uneasy. Guards whisper of an intercepted message, a transmission from across the Atlantic, sent under the codename Operation Saffron Bride. And at the center of it all stands Ibrahim Traoré, the young revolutionary who defied the West, toppled corruption, and gave hope to the poorest hands of Burkina Faso. For once, his heart is not in war, but in love. The woman he chose glows like dawn itself, her eyes soft, her voice calm, her smile the only peace he has known in years of chaos. But tonight something feels wrong. The ring that should symbolize eternity lies cold on his palm as a soldier kneels before him, trembling, holding a classified document marked Washington Confidential. The words bleed through the page, embedded asset confirmed. Mission continues until authorization is revoked. Traoré's eyes narrow. His world stops. Outside, fireworks light the city in celebration of a love that may not exist. Inside, a man stands in silence, realizing that the woman waiting in white might not be his salvation, but America's weapon. That night, Ibrahim Traoré realized the enemy wasn't beyond the walls. She was right beside him. Before love became betrayal, there was only hope. To understand the tragedy, one must first understand the man. Ibrahim Traoré was not born into power. He was forged by fire, by drought, hunger, and war. A boy who once shared half a loaf of bread with a starving soldier. A young cadet who watched his people suffer while foreign powers took their gold and called it aid. He rose not for glory, but for survival, to free a land drowning in debts it never owed. By his early 30s, Traoré had become more than a man. He was a symbol, a son of Sankara's dream, a soldier who believed that Africa's chains were not made of iron but of contracts and smiles. Yet even warriors need peace. In the calm after the storm, when the IMF had retreated and the streets of Ouagadougou began to rebuild, he met her. At a humanitarian conference in Lomé, delegates spoke of recovery and renewal. Among them was a woman who carried herself with the stillness of certainty. Her name was Amara Wells, daughter of a diplomat from Côte d'Ivoire and an American mother. She was everything the cameras loved, educated, graceful, fluent in French, and devoted to the idea of peace. For a man who had seen only betrayal, Amara was light. She smiled with patience, listened without judgment, and spoke of Africa's potential as though it were sacred scripture. In a world of generals and greed, she was poetry. The connection was immediate. Letters turned to meetings, meetings to dinners, dinners to long talks beneath the stars. She spoke of unity, of cultural bridges, of building something beautiful. A glass bridge of the Sahel, she called it, a monument of strength and transparency. Traoré believed her. For once, he believed love could coexist with leadership. The people adored the story, their president finding love not with royalty, but with compassion. Foreign media celebrated it too, perhaps a little too eagerly. Behind every headline was a shadow. While Traoré built schools, Amara's calls to Washington multiplied. Her father's name surfaced. Among retired diplomats working for private contractors, tied to the State Department, the same networks that had drafted Africa's trade restrictions and armed the rebels he fought. Still, he saw only love. When his intelligence chief questioned her background, Traoré silenced him. He said simply, "Enough suspicion. For once, let us believe in peace." But peace was an illusion carefully designed. As the wedding approached, small fractures appeared. A shipment of gold destined for the State Reserve vanished at sea. Encrypted files within the Ministry of Defense were accessed remotely between midnight and dawn. And one evening, returning early from a meeting, Traoré found Amara standing by the window, whispering into a small black device disguised as a jewelry box. When she turned, she smiled. "I was praying," she said. He wanted to believe her, but unease crept deeper. Her questions became precise. Why had the Russian engineers delayed the solar project? Where were the defense archives stored? Did he trust his generals completely? Each inquiry felt harmless, yet carried the weight of intent. His heart resisted the evidence. His soul, weary of battle, clung to hope. Across the ocean, Washington buzzed. In closed-door briefings, officials discussed soft neutralization. Direct intervention in Burkina Faso had failed. Coups had backfired. Now they turned to psychological containment. They did not need to kill Traoré. They only needed to control him, and what better way than through love? Years later, declassified files would name it Operation Saffron Bride. An embedded operative placed under diplomatic cover, instructed to gain access to Traoré's private communications and influence his policies, especially his alliances beyond Western control. But Amara was already divided. Somewhere between her orders and her heart, duty began to crumble. In Ouagadougou, their once radiant bond dulled under invisible weight. She smiled less. He slept less. Meetings grew colder, silences longer. When he spoke of a new constitution that would make Burkina Faso fully sovereign, she hesitated. Her hands trembled as she poured his tea. In that tremor he saw fear, not for him, but of him. The veil began to lift. On the eve of their wedding, a loyal officer brought a USB drive recovered from a downed drone near the palace. Inside was a fragment of a transmission to Langley, Virginia. It read, "Target emotionally compromised. Mission progressing. Awaiting further authorization." And beneath it, "He suspects nothing." The president read it twice. Then again, while the sound of drums from the city filtered through the palace walls. The truth settled like iron. The woman he loved, the bridge he thought would unite. Worlds was the structure built to collapse. Him, he stood motionless. His reflection caught in the marble floor and the fractured light of chandeliers. His heart was heavy, but his resolve heavier. He spoke to no one, not even to her. He simply looked at the engagement ring resting in his hand and whispered, "Tomorrow, the world will see what truth looks like." The morning after the intercepted message, the city awoke to music and celebration. Banners rippled above the streets, children painted flags on their faces, and every radio spoke of joy. But inside the palace, the atmosphere had changed. Ibrahim Traoré smiled for the cameras, waved to the cheering crowds, and greeted ambassadors as though nothing had happened. Yet beneath the calm exterior, something cold and calculating began to move. He had spent years confronting foreign threats. But this was different. This was personal. He ordered no arrests, no surveillance teams, no confrontations. Instead, he did what a soldier does best. He observed. He watched her movements, noted her glances, her absences, her half-truths. Every night, he replayed in his mind the small things he had once ignored, the moments that had seemed too ordinary to question. He began to move his closest advisors quietly, replacing guards, locking down communications, restricting diplomatic travel. Only 3 men knew the truth, and even they were forbidden to speak it aloud. "If she is what they say," he told his intelligence chief, "we must find the hand that guides her, not the heart that beats within her." The days stretched into weeks. Traoré performed his duties as usual, signing bills, visiting hospitals, meeting with farmers. But in the background, a hidden war began to unfold. Encrypted signals traced from the palace led to an abandoned compound on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, once used by a Western NGO. Inside, his agents found a cache of communication devices and coded letters marked with American intelligence insignia. The truth deepened. There was a network, and Amara was only one thread of it. At night, he would lie awake beside her, pretending to sleep, listening to her breathing. He wanted to believe it was the breath of innocence. But every inhale sounded like deception. Still, he could not bring himself to confront her. The soldier in him sought proof. The man in him sought hope. Meanwhile, foreign envoys began arriving in unusual numbers. The U.S. ambassador praised the upcoming wedding as a symbol of unity. European diplomats offered gifts, trade promises, and subtle warnings. Behind the smiles lay a common goal: to keep Traoré within their orbit. Every visit felt rehearsed, every compliment layered with quiet menace, and through it all, Amara played her role flawlessly. Her speeches about cultural bridges drew applause. Her interviews charmed the international press. She seemed born to play the part of a peacemaker. Yet there were cracks, tiny, fleeting moments that betrayed her. A trembling hand as she signed her name. A brief glance of guilt when foreign dignitaries mentioned U.S. policy. And once, when Traoré caught her alone in the palace garden, her expression was not one of love, but sorrow. As if she too was living a lie she could not escape. By the second month, the investigation had reached its most dangerous phase. Traoré's intelligence network uncovered evidence of funds being funneled through shell organizations, disguised as donations to youth initiatives, but actually used for political influence. At the center of every transfer, a U.S.-based foundation where Amara's mother was listed as a consultant. Each revelation twisted the knife deeper. Traoré realized the plot went beyond marriage. It was a soft invasion, executed through charm, culture, and emotion. Africa had been colonized by armies before. Now it was being conquered by affection and manipulation. He recorded his thoughts in a private journal. They do not send soldiers anymore. They send dreams, wrapped in smiles. One night, his closest aide, Captain Sawadogo, entered the office with fear in his eyes. He confessed that 2 of his men had been approached by foreign agents offering money for classified documents about Burkina Faso's new mineral deals. The same agents mentioned the name Amara Wells in code, the Dove. Traoré closed his eyes. The pieces were no longer scattered. They had formed a picture. Yet something inside him hesitated. He had seen traitors before, but this was different. This was the woman who had once traced his scars with her fingers, who had promised him a life beyond the noise of politics. To see her as an enemy required killing something inside himself. He summoned his intelligence chief to the old military base outside the capital, far from listening devices and foreign satellites. There, he reviewed every piece of evidence, recordings, intercepted emails, hidden bank transfers, and a coded message recovered from a satellite relay. Everything pointed to Amara as the centerpiece of a U.S. intelligence program designed to monitor African leaders sympathetic to anti-Western coalitions. The chief asked, "Do we act now?" Traoré looked out toward the red horizon and said, "Not yet." His voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. He knew that exposure too early would trigger chaos. The U.S. would deny everything. He needed undeniable proof, something that could stand before the world. The proof arrived not through spies, but through her. Late one night, while Amara slept, a message alert glowed faintly on her encrypted tablet. Traoré, unable to resist, opened it. It contained a single directive: objective compromised. Extraction required. Use event as cover. The event referred to the state banquet scheduled for the next evening, a gathering of generals, diplomats, and journalists. A perfect stage for a disappearance. It became clear, during the banquet, an extraction team would remove her from the palace, ending the operation and leaving him humiliated, painted as a man who had fallen for an illusion. He closed the tablet gently, staring at her sleeping form beside him. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt pity for a woman whose life was built on orders, not choices. The following evening, the palace glittered with lights. Foreign guests filled the hall, and reporters crowded the gardens. Amara looked radiant in gold and white, every gesture graceful, every smile rehearsed. But Traoré watched her differently now, every word, every step, a possible farewell. Midway through the dinner, he noticed subtle movements near the eastern corridor. 2 servers who weren't on the staff list, a shadow near the gate. The extraction had begun. Without a word, he left the table, walking calmly toward his private chamber. In the reflection of a tall mirror, he saw her follow, her face pale, her breath shallow. When they were alone, he spoke softly. "They're here for you, aren't they?" She froze. He stepped closer. "I know about the operation. The messages, the foundation, the lies." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't deny it. Her lips trembled. "I never wanted it to be you," she whispered. Her confession was quiet, broken, more human than calculated. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, two souls stood on opposite sides of truth. She told him everything. How her handlers promised it was only surveillance. How she believed she could protect him from within the web of manipulation. How she had fallen in love with the very man she was sent to deceive. For Traoré, the words were both a dagger and a relief. He had longed for the truth, and now that it came, it left him hollow. "You were supposed to break me," he said quietly. "Instead, you broke yourself." She begged him to leave, to let her disappear before the agents came. But he refused. "If they come for you," he said, "they will find me waiting." Minutes later, the security alarms rang faintly, barely audible under the music of the banquet. His guards intercepted two intruders disguised as maintenance workers. The extraction team never reached her room. By dawn, the operation had failed. But so had love. Amara was placed under protective observation within the palace. Her network was dismantled quietly. The embassy remained silent. Publicly, nothing happened. But within the corridors of power, everything had changed. Traoré now understood the scale of the war he was fighting. It was not a war of bullets or soldiers. It was a war of influence, of deception, of hearts turned into weapons. He had faced many enemies before, but never one who carried both a nation's flag and his heart. In the weeks that followed, Traoré appeared calm. He spoke to the press about unity and independence. He attended public events, smiled for photographs, and shook hands with leaders who had plotted against him. But inside, a transformation had begun. He had seen the truth of modern conquest, and from that truth, a new kind of resolve began to grow, a determination not just to defend Burkina Faso's sovereignty, but to expose the silent empire that sought to own it. "They taught me the price of trust," he wrote in his journal. "Now I will teach them the cost of betrayal." The wedding that never happened became the seed of a revolution neither side expected. And somewhere, behind closed doors in Washington, the failure of Operation Saffron Bride was quietly erased from the records. But history never forgets what files conceal. Weeks passed in uneasy silence. The world believed the scandalous rumors were nothing more than gossip. The press had no proof, the diplomats no courage. Inside the palace, however, Ibrahim Traoré lived with the ghost of a woman who was still alive. Amara remained within guarded chambers, neither prisoner nor guest. She painted, read, wrote letters she never sent. He visited her sometimes, not as a lover, not as a judge, but as a man trying to understand how faith and betrayal could coexist. Each visit ended the same way, a quiet look, a nod, then distance again. But deep within him something sharpened. The betrayal had not destroyed him. It had awakened him. Across the Atlantic, boardrooms and intelligence offices whispered. Operation Saffron Bride had failed, but it had revealed something more dangerous than success, a leader who could not be manipulated. Washington debated the next move. Should they discredit him? Replace him? In private memos, his name appeared beside words like nationalist, unpredictable, threat to influence. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré's closest circle assembled in secrecy. Generals, economists, engineers, farmers, voices from every corner of the nation. No journalists, no outsiders. He spoke plainly. They did not send soldiers. They sent affection, cameras, and contracts. They studied our weaknesses and offered them comfort. The room stayed silent. Then an old colonel stood and said, "If they use love as a weapon, we will use truth as our shield." That night, the plan began. A strategy that would expose the silent empire without firing a single bullet. 3 weeks later, an announcement shook the continent. President Traoré would deliver a live global address from the new Unity Hall, transmitted across Africa and the West alike. Diplomats dismissed it as a speech about trade, but inside the palace his staff understood. It was the unveiling. As the cameras rolled, Traoré stepped onto the stage. No military uniform, no medals, only a simple dark suit and the weight of his decision. His voice was calm. For generations, he began, we were told that freedom is granted through aid, that friendship is measured by dependency. But now we have learned, freedom is not something to be gifted. It is something to be reclaimed. He revealed no names, no nations. Instead, he told a story about a leader and a woman, about trust turned into leverage, about how nations are seduced into submission. He spoke not as an accuser, but as a witness. The broadcast went viral within hours. Across Africa, screens flickered with his words. In foreign capitals, advisors scrambled to control the narrative. They could deny specifics, but not the truth within the story. And in her room, Amara watched the speech through a flickering television. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from guilt but from pride. He had spared her name. He had spared her life. He had turned pain into power. That night she disappeared. No guards reported entry, no cameras caught movement. Only an open window and a letter remained on the table. You gave me back my soul. I will carry your forgiveness like a wound, and your love like armor. Amara. Some said she fled to a neutral country. Others whispered she was taken by the very people who once controlled her. No one ever found her again. Traoré read the letter once, folded it, and locked it in his desk. He never mentioned her name in public again, but from that day forward, his eyes carried a quiet fire that no peace treaty could extinguish. In retaliation, Western media unleashed a storm. Editorials labeled him a dictator, a demagogue, a populist threat. Economic sanctions followed, then diplomatic isolation. But instead of breaking, his nation united. Farmers volunteered to work without pay. Miners refused foreign contracts. Students organized technology drives to replace imports. The betrayal had sparked something deeper: pride. And across the continent, other nations began whispering his name, not as a rebel, but as a symbol of resistance. Months later, in a secluded conference on African soil, Traoré met with leaders from across the region. Their agendas were different, but their eyes held the same understanding. Sovereignty was no longer about armies, it was about autonomy. As the meeting ended, a messenger handed him a small package with no sender's name. Inside lay a silver bracelet engraved with 2 words. Still watching, he smiled faintly. Perhaps she was alive after all. Perhaps she still believed in the cause they had both created through pain. He placed the bracelet in his pocket and walked toward the waiting cameras. The world would see his confidence. Only he would know its cost. Years later, when historians wrote of that era, they argued about the woman's identity, the origin of the conspiracy, the morality of the president's choices. But the truth remained the same. One act of deception had reshaped a continent's understanding of power. In the end, the story of Ibrahim Traoré and Amara Wells was not a love story at all. It was a warning, a lesson that even in an age of satellites and sanctions, the most dangerous battlefield is still the human heart. Empires fall, he once said in his final journal entry, not when their enemies rise, but when their lies are revealed. Time softened the scandal, but sharpened its meaning. The West tried to erase the event through silence. Burkina Faso turned it into legend. Children in schools learned not the names of presidents or spies, but the idea that truth, once uncovered, can rebuild a nation faster than any aid package. Traoré aged quietly. He wore no crown, demanded no monuments. His revolution had never been about him. It was about awakening a continent that had long mistaken obedience for diplomacy. In the evenings, he walked through the rebuilt capital, where the people greeted him not as a ruler, but as a neighbor. At the city's heart rose a structure that became the soul of his legacy, the glass bridge of unity. It was not built of steel imported from Europe, but from local artisans who molded sand, fire, and vision into transparency. It stretched across the river Nazinon, connecting the 2 halves of the capital that had been divided since colonial days. The bridge shimmered in the sun, a symbol of clarity, honesty, and rebirth. On the opening day, Traoré stood before the people and said, "This bridge is not a monument to our success, but to our mistakes." "Every pane of glass carries the memory of what we almost lost," crowds cheered. Across Africa, leaders sent envoys to study it, not the architecture, but the message. A structure so fragile yet unbreakable in spirit, built by a nation once brought to its knees through deceit. The story of the bridge spread beyond politics. It became a metaphor in classrooms, a verse in songs, a symbol in art. They called it the Mirror of Africa. In Washington, the scandal was quietly buried under new headlines and changing administrations. Those who had designed Operation Saffron Bride were reassigned, promoted, or vanished into consultancy firms that advised on stability in emerging markets. But within the corridors of influence, a subtle fear took root. They had underestimated the emotional intelligence of rebellion, the ability of truth to turn humiliation into momentum. For every policy paper written in those years, one phrase appeared in confidential briefings: "Avoid another Burkina." That warning became legend among diplomats, an admission that manipulation had its limits. One morning, years after the bridge's completion, Traoré received a sealed envelope with no insignia. Inside was a photograph, a small school in Sierra Leone, rebuilt after the Civil War. In the background, a woman stood with children, her hair covered, her smile faint but familiar. Amara. There were no words, no signatures. Just an image, proof that she lived. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it beside the bracelet she had once left him. He did not pursue her, nor announce her return to anyone. Some ghosts, he believed, must be allowed to haunt quietly. In his final years, as Africa entered a new century of defiance and creation, Ibrahim Traoré gave one last address to the Continental Assembly. His hair was silver now, his voice steadier than ever. He spoke not of enemies or empires, but of endurance. "History does not remember the conquerors," he said. "It remembers those who refuse to be conquered. The future belongs to the honest heart, not the powerful hand. We once mistook affection for alliance, luxury for friendship, and silence for peace. Now we know better." When he finished, the hall stood in silence, not for applause, but in reverence. For the first time in modern memory, African leaders stood together without foreign advisors dictating the agenda. The continent had not yet broken its chains completely, but it had learned to hold the key. After his passing, a foundation was created in his name, the Traoré Institute for Sovereign Innovation. Its emblem, the glass bridge under a rising sun. Its mission, to teach young Africans how to recognize manipulation disguised as diplomacy. Each year, on the anniversary of the bridge's inauguration, citizens leave a single white flower at its center. And as sunlight passes through the glass, it casts a spectrum of colors on the river below, reminding them that transparency, once achieved, refracts into beauty. No one ever discovered the full truth of Operation Saffron Bride. Some said Amara was a spy who betrayed her orders for love. Others said she was the hero, that her mission was to test him, not destroy him, and a few whispered that she was still out there, protecting him from a distance, her presence hidden behind the shadows of diplomacy. In the end, it did not matter. The real story was not about betrayal. It was about transformation. Traoré had turned the most intimate wound into the seed of liberation. He taught his people that the price of sovereignty is not victory, but vigilance. And as the sun sets over the glass bridge each evening, his words echo faintly in the wind. Let them spy, let them scheme, let them write their plans in secret. We will answer them with light. The river beneath the glass bridge never stops moving. Its waters remember everything. The reign of old empires, the blood of forgotten wars, the ashes of revolutions. But tonight, as the last light of day scatters across its surface, it carries something new. Peace. Burkina Faso breathes differently now. Not the peace of silence nor the peace of surrender, but the peace that follows awakening. Markets hum with ordinary laughter. Children race bicycles across dusty roads, and in the distance, the transparent bridge gleams like a promise kept. They say Ibrahim Traoré's shadow still walks there at dusk, silent, unguarded, as if inspecting the bridge for cracks invisible to the eye. No one sees him, yet everyone feels him. His memory has become an atmosphere, something inhaled rather than spoken of. Time did what time always does. It turned pain into myth. In marketplaces, griots sing of Amara, the woman who came from the west to destroy a man, and instead destroyed her orders. Some call her a traitor, others a saint. Most simply call her the one who chose love over allegiance. In the archives of faraway nations, her file remains sealed under layers of classification. Analysts still debate her motives. But in Africa, the verdict is simpler. Even spies can find truth, once they fall in love with it. Tourists who visit the glass bridge say that at sunrise, when the air is still and the river quiet, the glass hums softly like wind through a flute. They call it the voice of Traoré. Engineers dismiss it as temperature and wind pressure. But elders smile, saying the bridge sings because it remembers its maker. For them, the bridge is not architecture, it is confession. Every transparent panel a window into a man's soul, once fractured by betrayal, now made whole through forgiveness. It stands as the ultimate paradox, the most delicate structure in the nation, and yet the one that has never fallen. In the decades that followed, his story ignited quiet revolutions across the continent. Nations began demanding audits of their foreign debts. Leaders refused contracts written in invisible ink. University students studied diplomacy not as obedience but as strategy. What began as heartbreak became curriculum. What began as scandal became movement. Africa, once described as a sleeping giant, learned that it had never been asleep, only silenced. And from that silence, the voice of Ibrahim Traoré echoed louder than any army. Inside the old presidential library, behind a glass case, rests a single letter, Amara's final note. It is faded now, ink bled by time, but the signature still curves with grace. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "Love, when truthful, never serves an empire. No guards protect the display." Children press their faces to the glass, reading the words that once unmade a man and remade a nation. It is a simple relic, but it outshines the medals, the decrees, and the flags surrounding it. Every century has a story it must tell to survive itself. For this one, it is the story of a soldier who discovered that the hardest war to win is the war against despair. He fought it not with bullets, but with forgiveness. Not with armies, but with understanding. He taught his people that sovereignty is not granted, it is maintained daily, like faith. That trust is both weapon and wound, and that love, even when broken, can still illuminate the truth. So when the sun sets behind the bridge and the river glows with the reflection of gold and fire, the air carries a single echo, a whisper across the continent, spoken in many tongues but meaning the same thing. They tried to deceive him with love. He answered with truth, and from that truth, a continent rose. Some stories end with victory. This one ends with understanding, because history will forget the details of espionage, the codes, the missions, the code names, but it will never forget the man who stood in love's ruins and built a bridge from glass and dared the world to see through it. The heart of Africa, he once wrote, was never weak. It was simply waiting for the courage to forgive. And that is how the story of betrayal became the story of rebirth. Not through power, not through vengeance, but through light.